Okay, then let's try to do this properly. Johnny is obviously not here this week, but she should really be back next week. Last week introduction seems to have left some of you a bit baffled because I was throwing at you too many things at the same time. But I hope you have retained the difference, or the shift that is taking, that takes place between the authors we looked at in the last term and what we start looking at now, about the problems that looking for certainty, looking for solid ground one way or another brings. And therefore, there is then an entirely new take on the question of sense from different angles, because ground or concept as the ground, as for Hegel, have proved not only difficult and problematic, but also, as Adorno has shown, negative if they are applied all the way to the ultimate consequences. If you last week we briefly looked at Nietzsche, but the text "Why I Am So Wise" and more general image of. Some of you had read it, some of you didn't. Did you try to read it again, or it just went straight for the readings of this week?
I read it.
Did you? Did you read it?
A bit, yes.
Not all. What did you get out of those 15 pages?
Not all pages, but in the beginning.
The first section.
Oh. He was describing something what was negative, a sickness stuff, its positive outcome eventually, and how it does. And surprisingly, he was referring to Russian fatalism, which is funny.
Problem.
So that I got out.
Why did you? Sorry, let me rephrase the question. The disease and sickness and fatalism it brings up. Did you hear something different than the Hegelian path that goes from one point through something in order to get out at a positive end on the other side, or you didn't notice that as a possible comparison?
I didn't think of compared to Hegelian view. I just wanted to see, to get through his way of writing and to see how does he think about this. I can't compare it really, but I found it was. Yeah.
But he doesn't believe in guilt or suffering. So the point of obviously you have to experience the suffering. What I got was to go through the suffering, but he doesn't believe in that being a goal as such. There's a kind of.
Does it become, rather than kind of Hegel's totalizing view, Nietzsche believes that we're always in a state of coming out of illness. So it's this kind of constant changing.
Constant changing, yes. It's not only coming out of illness, it's coming out of illness towards health, and then coming out of health towards illness.
Yeah.
And so it's a chain that doesn't close. And that's what it means to be alive for him.
Being in the chain.
Not being in a chain as in the negative sense, but the fact that one thing constantly is referring to the previous and the next. And then once you move into the next, you still have the previous and the next, the previous and the next. They repeat. He uses the word, I believe in the last of these small sections, they repeat themselves, but they don't reach that closing totalization that the Hegelian move was looking for. It is
So it's still moving, it's open.
it's precisely moving. It's constantly moving and open. He speaks a lot about being decadence and being healthy and full of life. And he says, first he describes himself as decadent, and then he describes himself as the opposite of decadent. It's full of life and everything, and
that's
that
it.
throws
I
you
was
off.
trying to go, where is the end? What is it?
Precisely because there is no end. So it says from my periods of being ill, and he was really ill, whether it was a real disease or completely psychosomatic, only on the body of his tensions, he was really suffering. But in those moments of suffering, he said, there is when I felt more alive and so most clearly true things, so I could write Daybreak and another couple of things. He wrote very important things very lucidly, very fast, when his body was at its lowest.
Mhm.
And but not because he had to pay for with the help for that production. It's precisely the economy of effort that is done away here. What is aiming, what is wants to describe is that one is to open to what comes. That's why he brings up Russian fatalism. Do not resist. If you resist, you enter that, or if you want to do good deeds, conclude things, you enter what he calls resentment. Where one resents the world is bad, one resents being poor, or being bad health, or that things are socially wrong. And instead, he says that that's a negative thing. It's almost is a good morality that is actually negative because it is suffocating. It is a killer. It is the thing that prevents movement from happening, prevents life from flowing.
But there is logic in it. And
The
the logic is
Mhm.
to survive, basically, to calm down on your responses, isn't it?
Precisely, that's what he said. Can you articulate that a bit more?
I can't explain it really, because this is just in there. This is how people see usually life. Whatever comes, comes, and this is
Mhm.
where Russian roulette took its roots, basically acceptance of everything. But if you look at it from a philosophical point, it would be you will survive by accepting, or like if we look at another philosopher, by giving up yourself, basically. You accept. You don't take responsibility for what is
Who
happening.
would be the other philosopher?
Oh, just a minute. It flew out. Question number 3.
That's all right.
It's about something you give up because you give up, you are stable. You are actually totally without. You are not resisting, and the energy of not resisting is with you, so you survive longer. Maybe it comes from climate, because very, very, very harsh climate.
That's precisely
So-
what he mentions here when he says, when I am in bad health, I do not resist the bad health. I do not try to fight against it. I don't even resent the fact that I'm in bad health, because all that would be consuming energy. And maybe consuming energy would prevent me to get to the next stage, or to get through it. As a parallel, there was a Greek poet.
This is opposite of enlightenment, isn't it? Which I mentioned before. I should say never had enlightenment.
It's good.
The enlightenment about improving yourself, pushing yourself,
It is the opposite of
continuously to
enlightenment.
achieve something.
Say more.
Oh, I can't really.
Does
But
anyone,
how enlightenment
is anyone hearing the same echo that Nadia does about enlightenment here?
I have.
Sorry.
Sorry. Go on.
All yours.
I have a kind of the problem with that is that to say that it's a kind of opposite of enlightenment, to be say that there would be no kind of way of progression. So I don't think it's the difference is in this resistance is that it's not resigning yourself to the situation, because if you were to resign yourself to this situation, that means that, like, in terms of how governments are run, nothing would ever change. Whereas this way of thinking is something more of I don't know even if it is an acceptance of it, but a kind of will of moving on to that next stage, which holds something else. But I don't know whether I kind of
Well, I only can say if it's relating to Russia, it would be well known that Russia had slave system up to what late 19th century, where serfdom has been domineering everything: culture, economic system, political system, and so on. And this is where people were belonging to somebody, and they didn't take responsibility. They were staying in that state. They were not prepared to to move out of the state. Of course, still revolution happened then.
Nietzsche obviously, well, most likely takes the Russian fatalism as an image. It's not
Exactly how
saying
it is.
that it should be like that. What the element that is here that I believe is very important is that he speaks of two states, if you like, the health and the disease, that would be taken as extremes, and in between the normal mentality, the common sense, would expect there to be a normality, which one would be very happy to develop. And instead it just does not want that, because that's static. So it's a very, if you like, entropic move when you go from one extreme to the next, and then from the once you find yourself at the opposite pole, then you only see through. It's relational. You see back and you see forth, but you don't expect to stop and stay in a static state, because that's precisely not life.
And that is between sickness and health.
In this case, between sickness and health, but it returns. Ultimately, what it's talking about here is the unity of identity of the individual and of concepts in general. You might have noticed that it hits, that I feel it's a Christianity.
Yeah, he's very harsh.
And because Christianity has a number of solid steps, the unity and the permanence of the human soul that is outside time, and then the move towards salvation, which is a non-conclusive passage, and that would actually close things, would not be life if you believe with the idea that you have to reach, you function you move in function of a specific goal, and once you've reached that, nothing more happens. So you don't change because your soul is eternal, and then you're aiming to reach this eternal point of salvation. That's, in a certain way, what is also criticizing is the model of Western thought that can be in Christianity or in philosophy, to think of identity, to think of the individual as this solid thing that is prior and external to life. So change, that's interesting that you brought up enlightenment. Change somehow in here does not happen. In what he criticizes, there is no room for change. And instead he wants actually to bring change all the way to the to the forefront, and think actually there is only change. And how does it mean? What does it mean? How does one live only in change if everything keeps changing? So change is not in between things anymore, what Nietzsche proposes in mode of life. It's not in between solid points. It's not secondary. It's exactly the opposite. You surf constantly, and your wave changes curve, changes color, changes wind, changes temperature, or want, or you name what is changing. But it is a continuing and gradual flow. And flow is the key concept of today's seminar. In this way. Flow, flux, nuances. It's very silent
Yes.
today. Did it make sense? Starting to be digested, or it still sounds entirely mad?
He sounds to me hopelessly ahead of his time, because I mean, this is almost postmodernism, isn't it?
It is in a certain way, yes.
And yet postmodernism, that thing doesn't start for another 100 years, really, does it?
Almost, yes.
So he's really ahead of himself, really, and everyone else.
But actually, that in his writings, he often says, already the title of this small chapter, why I am so wise, why do I write such great books? I mean, it was a bit of, he you can say a bit of madness wasn't there, but it was also provocative in the way he wrote. And when he speaks of the character he builds Zarathustra that comes to announce the death of God, as in the death of the concept of unity and the solid ground, the people laugh at this character that he stages in the book. The character Zarathustra says, "I've come too soon." Nobody can understand what I'm saying. God is dead, but the news is still coming to us. And it becomes, no, you're absolutely right on that front. But it was sounding off sync with most of European thought at the time. That there was positivism, logical positivism at the time. The old Marxism was the other line that was based on the certainty of going somewhere, and that was necessary, and all that doesn't fit with each other. The only other author is Schopenhauer, some 40 years earlier, that borrowed from Western thought and thought of undoing the solidity of the self. But
Was it? Oh, right. Sorry, I've answered my own question.
Another question?
For our benefit.
Sorry?
For our benefit.
Oh, I was going to say, I was going to ask whether Schopenhauer was affected by Eastern writing, but of course he was, and he cited it as being affected by Eastern writing in Nietzsche's text. So.
Okay, so this is the way into it. Then we had the episode of Nestor Remembers, which you might have tried to read aloud or not. And that very quickly was concerning the question that there was no object of memory of that act of remembering. So that act of remembering was dynamic, was building the memory for the use of Telemachus, so that Telemachus could actually do something. If Nestor had said, you know what, I'm too old, I don't remember anything, I wasn't even around anymore, then it would have been end of the story, end of the Odyssey as a text, but also end of the possibilities. Instead, by creating a number of options, plausible rather than certain, but nevertheless something that one could act upon, and Telemachus can go forward. Again, the point is precisely to do away with the solidity of the ground, and see if there are other paths of it. And this is where the preface of that Foucault writes to Anti-Oedipus of Deleuze and Guattari comes in. It is a very dense, very short but very dense text. I think that it would be actually good to read a couple of bits to what happens here is that the notion of flow or flux that Nietzsche has brought to undermine the solidity of identity in general, or the individual, is somehow interpreted to desire, an erotic sensuality of desire. And what is quite important to understand is that Foucault says it straight away, is that this desire is not the interpretation of desire that has been presented by Freud. It's a frustrated desire, a desire already channeled into the Oedipal structure of hoping to recreate a utopian situation, the love for the mother of the child that the father forbids, or rather the love for the father that the mother forbids for the daughter, the younger. The child will always hope to rejoin the mother fully in a situation that never was and could never be. But that utopian possibility for Freud is what structures, and the frustration of that utopian possibility is what for Freud structures the person. And this is not the desire Foucault draws from. And he says that the European culture, Western culture, after the war, he says from 45 to 65 more or less, the second post-war period, was functioning between Marx and Freud, and one should never go too far from those two reference points, and from semiotic as the third a reference. I mean, this is very French, but as a distribution of thought. But they were both works or structures that functioned around a lack of something. The frustration of the Oedipal desire for Freud, the social exploitation in the Marxist description and interpretation of society, the exploitation, the alienation of the individual that is alienated because it produces more than what is paid, socially and culturally, therefore the same problem. So two models that are highly economic, because there is a present, there is a person that lacks something that in principle, in abstract terms, is part of their identity. Do you understand? This is a very important point because it's something that is still part of our way of thinking very deeply.
So the person lacks,
Sorry?
their identity, the claim is that they lack something that is already there.
Yes.
Yes.
It's there, but one lacks it, so
I'm
one has to
aware of it.
recuperate it.
Yeah.
It's,
So a person does not ever lack, doesn't miss identity. It's always there, but it's not what he thinks should be.
No. The fact is that the lack is based on the fact that one does not have or does not control or is not what it should be as a full identity. It is the same problem that was presented in Hegel. There is a subject that needs to alienate itself into its other, which first and foremost is its own body or in the society, and then realize that that body is not only for itself, in itself, but it's for itself, and then one recuperates that body as its own, so then the subject, it becomes the full subject. Now you could take the same structure, for Marx was turned around, so you start with the material, the body, the history first, and not with the subject. But the problem remains the same. You have an identity that is, in abstract terms, complete, but historically, in our lives, lacks something. And the whole sense, the organization of sense that we have, is a move toward reappropriating that lack. Does this make sense?
So,
So
Yes.
is this where it comes about, this idea of, again, kind of continual change, in the sense that in Hegel there is no room for that continued movement? There's just completion.
Yes, but the idea would, in Marxist terms, the revolution and the new humanity that would happen after the revolution would be that completion.
Yeah.
So the closing of a dialectical move remains in Marxist terms. And what Foucault says that is that both of these systems function along a dualistic structure. There is always what one is and what one lacks. And the desire function only along this rail, if you like, along these tracks. It's sort of already channeled.
Then Nietzsche has the concept of the self-overcoming, which, right?
So Nietzsche has its concept of?
Doesn't he say that there's a continual overcoming of the self?
Yes, but it's completely
It's
different than
different,
this one.
yeah.
Because he's not speaking of luck. Actually, when one is ill, when another point of view would say it would be lacking health, he actually takes the point of view or the position of the disease to see better through
Yeah.
the health and to see better through his own intentions and what he wants to write. So he's not describing disease or sickness as missing something, lacking something. It's just one way of being.
Which he overcomes.
Which
the
overcomes,
next way
yes.
of being, and then has to be overcome again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when he comes up with the concept of overman, which has been then translated as superman, or it's not the strongest man that wins over everybody else. It is the man that is able to overcome itself or herself continuously
again.
into the next stage,
Yeah.
not in a sense of becoming stronger or survivor. It's not
It's
that.
better than your previous self, rather than better than anyone else.
It's not even better. It's just going over through the self you are into the next situation that comes along. So that you do not have an identity that you have to defend, protect, and make resist change. Because what he wants to embrace is precisely change. While this dualism that Foucault is referring to is precisely a structure that wants, one way or another, to preserve a solid description of identity. Are you still with me? Okay. And this is what he calls the dualistic interpretations. It is a surge of libido modulated by the class struggle. Quite a right sentence, but it says it is nevertheless dualistic, and there is a sign or a symptom. This is why he points out at semiotics that works around the twofold concept of structure and lack. So the structure of this identity is one made of an abstract or metaphysical complete identity and a lacking historical identity. And the whole move would be to close it. So there is a dualism that is still Hegelian in this process. Although, especially for the Freudian take, would never be closed. The one would always be the one that has a frustrated Oedipus complex. One never satisfies Oedipus complex historically or in real life. Maybe it does through art or in the dreams, something else. But no, in the dualism of I am 48 and I am teaching in Birmingham. That doesn't happen in this state. But what Foucault finds in the work of Deleuze and Guattari in Anti-Oedipus, and not only in that book, in this book, but others that they write, is that there is different angle that takes place, with a different move that takes place here, that permits to overcome the most serious consequences of this solid identity. And in this sense, you could say there is an echo, although it's not that we want to echo it directly, of what Adorno had said about dialectics, that produced necessarily fascism and repression. Because he's saying that this notion of solid identity, of a fixed identity, or an identity that needs to be protected and needs to be completed because it is lacking something, is first and foremost a form of fascism that we have inside our own heads. Before resisting problems in society or problems in cultures, it is us who are implementing this form of self-repression, which is the root of all the other forms of repression and fascism that then one sees in historical terms, because it keeps things blocked. It keeps identity blocked. So if you can only be male or female, straight, if you're an artist, you can only do what art has decided art was. You can never invent something else. You can never change. But your questions about enlightenment, it is true that he criticizes some rationality, deterministic rationality of enlightenment. Yes. Nietzsche in this case. But at the same time, he is, and so is Foucault, pointing out how the need for the possibility of change, that where do you open up, how do you find that exit that Foucault was pointing out in the text about enlightenment we read at the beginning of the other term? Well, the point is precisely that you have to break open the concept of identity, the concept of the individual, the subject that we have inherited as closed and solid. If you think of the image that traditional forms of Christianity give of the soul is non-temporal, is external to our body. It is inside it for a while, but then the body decays and the soul resists. So the soul is not the historical life. Has effects from it, obviously one sins, but the soul and the body are not the same. The problem was already Cartesian. There was a thinking, the res cogitans thinking thing, and res extensa, the extended thing, the body. And there was always this separation, and the one that was given a privileged position was hierarchically more important, is what it always comes across at the end, was the thinking mind soul element, because it was not perishable, and it was made more important. Well, the perishable was made less important because the non-perishable was seen as the thing to preserve. But is preserving then has negative effects, and it's the same thing we've seen in Adorno, and now comes along as the very root of fascism again. If you do not allow yourself room for change, if you do not allow yourself some fluidity in the definition of the self you have made or the self you have been given, then there is no possibility for anything different than what already is. So art will remain that thing that is painted on canvas, framed with a golden decorated frame, and in the living room, and presents battles or Madonna or Child. That's it. And so forth. And it is not by chance that Foucault speaks of an ars erotica and then an ars of living regarding the methodology for resisting this unity. It's not just one metaphor or another. There is something much more fundamental, substantial about this choice of ars erotica, because by speaking of desire, he also wants to bring up all that has been relegated to the lowest possible rungs of the description of the self and the person in the culture and society. The body and the sexuality and the sensual and the sexual and the desire when is really not rationalizable. Before or outside or in between or enmeshed, when there is something that you can pull apart and say, this is here, that's there. That's what that rationality of enlightenment you rightly pointed out was what Nietzsche didn't want, but kept distant. That when that cannot be applied, then there would be a crisis. There would have been that is feared, and that's precisely why Foucault points at that. Say this is in the work of Deleuze and Guattari is the most important thing. If we can make that flow, then we can resist the inner censorship that we've been taught to apply to ourselves. It doesn't make sense so far. I am repeating it, but I believe it's quite important that it sinks in the right way. It is clear, because then this concept of moving from a solid unity of the subject, the fixed solid unity of the subject, as, again, your point was quite right, the subject has been posed by enlightenment, the unity of the subject, as the ground of society.
Why do you say the unity of the subject? Why what is being united?
No, it's not united. That's precisely the point.
Okay.
It starts as unity, not united. It's not a compound of different things that come together. It is precisely the opposite. It starts off as a definition that is solid and clearly separate inside and outside. It's the subject and outside the subject. This is why, for example, it comes with enlightenment and all the studies of politics and justice that took place during the Enlightenment, that torture no longer made sense, because there was an ultimate barrier between inside and outside the body, and the body was not to be touched. So the body becomes somehow sacred in a way that the soul was earlier. So the individual is the barrier between the individual and the rest of the world. And you then only deprive of freedom that individual, and you jail for him. But it is because you cannot break that perimeter, if you like, anymore. That it is something that is an atom of society. it's very important. I mean, there are Johnny knows much better than I do about it, but she studied it in detail. She often makes a parallel between the mechanics, physical mechanics in Newton, where atoms are the fundamental smallest element of nature, and they bang against each other, but they cannot compenetrate, and they individual in society. That becomes a barrier. That's the physical outer limit of our bodies coincide with our person, and therefore that is where things stop, and you can make a very, very clear difference. And there is an inside and outside, but these perimeter, if you like, the definition of the individual, the definition of the self, is what constitutes a new ground
Okay.
for politics, at least. And it's quite important because you remember that Descartes had reached that point, and I think therefore I am, because but I think that I have defined the point where the I of myself is, and that's solid, that's certain, that's the thing on which I can step on to do everything else. Nietzsche has just said, well, that I think therefore I am is a continuous flow, because I'm thinking next before I forget I think of something else, I'm thinking differently. That myself is in continuous flow. And now Foucault is pushing this even further by showing that if one actually even tries to retain that solid point, one does the greatest disservice possible to the self, which is closing it down, censoring it, capturing it, that's the technical word he uses, in political structures that are negative. Does it make sense? Okay. So then, to give away who the murderer is, straight away, he suggests that to resist these, the position to assume is one that is nomadic. Now here we are also entering a very metaphoric language that will circulate in the next seminars, and also very specialized and geographic in a way. We've seen, started mentioning territories last week and deterritorialization. Now there is someone nomadic moving across these territories, but we briefly, we'll see territories again. The territory is not the geography of the ground. The territory is something that is made, and as it is being made, it can also be unmade in order to be remade in a different organization. So it's a fluid geography. And now we have this figure that the self is nomadic through a territory which is the definition of the self, just to give a very condensed description of it. And there are two, I want to go into the text more in detail, but there are 2 points, two figures that Foucault indicates as negative. One is, he calls them the political ascetics, the sad militants, or the terrorists of theory. Brings up a lot of figures that are highly dogmatic even today, if you will. And then the bureaucrats of the revolution, that's one figure. And the other figure is the poor technicians of desires, those that see everything as a symptom to be cured somehow. The psychologists and psychoanalysts that are, and the semiologists, those that very clearly constantly divide sign into signified and signified. Those are a repeat in the logic of sense, in the logic of even of grammar, or in the logic of visual cultures, the fact that there is a sign, a symptom, something that is a body, something that is temporal and perishable. So that's the signifier, and a signified core, the soul, the real identity, the point that is expressed. This is the dualism that creates the problem. This is the dualism that when one is making art, make people outside asking you, what does it mean? Well, it means nothing. It means that I have fun making it. It means what you want to attach to it And that meaning will keep changing. Otherwise, you will have a visual description, you will have advertising, you will have visual communication. And that's not what it is. A good art piece is never closed. A good art piece constantly allows you to say again, well, this, this, that, actually, but I like keep looking at it or listening to it. If it were a description of one meaning, it would be enough to look at it once. You got it. That's it. And yet there are books or paintings or movies or pieces of music or whatever else which we constantly go back to over and over and over again. So that problem of the dualism of semiotic, which Deleuze, Guattari, Foucault, Derrida, all the postmodern move criticize it very heavily, has this problem of separating the materiality of what we are doing. And when I say materiality, it's not only the physical presence of the painting, but the sensual pleasure of painting that painting is also the materiality. And that, to me, is far more important than whatever meaning one can see attached to my work after that. I work because I like making art, because it gives me pleasure because making whatever I am making. That, if one looks for a goal, that's the goal, not representing a meaning. I hope this resonates with all of us several times around. And you're not thinking, what? Are you not wanting to paint exactly that or make exactly an installation for that specific intention and so on?
The process is more important sometimes than the outcome.
But the process is more important not because you shift attention from the point, the end point of the goal to the path through it. It's because one wants to dwell in that process of making. That's the working of desire. There is an eroticism where it's not the climax you're looking for in this sense. It's the whole state, the whole sensuality of it.
How do you see Giacometti in this case?
Say it again?
Giacometti. The one who did
Giacometti.
Yeah, Giacometti. Oh, it sounds beautiful.
Why
Because
would
he
play?
was going on and on and on, like he could make 50 rub off and carry on
Yeah.
doing the same.
Well, it's precisely because of what you paint, or you what
Yes,
you,
yes, I
yeah.
do.
So the pleasure of being there with the material, the pleasure of the kind of brush, the kind of pigment, the density of the color, the
Don't tell
smells,
me, I know.
all that. That is wonderful. And then you like looking at what you've done because you're trying to figure out what attracts you to it, and then you think, oh, maybe I need more orange there, or maybe no, well, let's try. with orange there. Or no, another one is setting up an installation and I didn't know what's coming out of this. Actually, this works. It's and you like because you don't want. It's not what you find at the end, but it's the process of finding it that gives you is an expression of the desire. For there is a pleasure attached to it. But Foucault insists this is not a clean pleasure for Sunday afternoon living room. This is directly erotic and sexual. This is where that completely non-capturable energy of desire that is sensual and sexual and erotic at the same time comes out in its most energetic and lively form. Yes?
Is this like the kind of an expression of the drive to keep on making work after something is complete, or just the nature of making art as a kind of a continuous process, in the sense that you may deem that a work is finished but it's never really finished because there's something in you that makes you want to continue making art?
Yes, if you're quite close to it. If you take away the want as this will that is determined and aware, as much as there isn't such a determined will in all the erotic nuances of physical eroticism, which I want to make love. No, it's not. Doesn't work like that. It's sort of cloud you enter to progressively, and then you are in it, and it dictates its own terms, and that's why it is of such different kind than the deterministic rationality that, rightly so, you pointed out, came out of enlightenment. But the extreme consequences of that deterministic rationality were that one needed specific points, fixed, firm points on which to step, on which constantly to go back to or use as goals, to function, and everything else was in between, was in function of and less important, because it was just the path towards something. Here instead, the whole thing is turned not only 90 degrees, but opened up inside out. And what allows this desire to be alive, what allows us to be alive and human, is to be nomadic in this new territory that is opened up. And everything starts moving at this point. So you no longer have something that is fixed as a reference. It is far more demanding, certainly, and it's not easy. This is why a lot of people say, what, I obey, I'm very happy, things as they are, as long as they don't bother me too much. Because this requires a lot of responsibility to take on, and it's not easy. Very often you end up in the wrong spot.
Let's see, I've just been reading recently Bataille's eroticism. Is this similar to like when he talks about discontinuous? And
I know very little of Bataille, but but it somehow makes they're pointing toward something that is similar. Bataille is working also on the idea that the unity of the self must be broken, and that's the only way to reach real humanity and real freedom. It is much more drastic and brutal to it. The whole concept of acephalo, cutting off the head, of suicide as a way of survival is far more drastic than just letting yourself go as Nietzsche proposed. I can't say much, and I don't take it as absolutely right or correct, but they are pointing in the same direction. The unity of self, as it has been inherited from modern, and the last being Hegel, but I work a lot on the economies of Hegel, they are rejecting that. There is if you are interested in going further, there is a short essay of Derrida on Bataille called Restricted and General Economy, where Bataille takes the Hegelian dialectic process, which constantly finds a response at the end of each term, of each dialectical spin. And that's the restricted economy, the one that has always a price for each product, or a product for each price, to give you really the sense of an economy. Then Bataille speaks of a general economy, which is at the end of this process, when you look at the ultimate, there isn't an ultimate price or an ultimate product to get. There isn't a final concept like in Hegel. There is nothing. The last thing is a formula, like in a formula where it says A equal something like this is equal that. You have the one term, then you've got the equal, and nothing. You've got silence on the other side. So it remains completely open.
Is it by Bataille?
Bataille.
Okay.
No, the text. Let me correct it. There is an article titled Restricted and General Economy by Derrida on the work of Bataille. The concept of the general economy, I believe, is spread a bit all over Bataille's writing. So this is why that's a way into it. Not a shortcut, but a way into it. But yes. So what? Obviously, Foucault is speaking about the book. Anti-Oedipus was published, I believe, in 1974 in French, and it was written on the wake of 1968 change. This is why Foucault speaks of what is happening in Europe at the gate, at our frontier, our horizon, there was Vietnam. The war in Vietnam also finished at the same time. And he speaks of the war of Vietnam as a challenge to the power that be, because Vietnam won, obviously, against the United States. And the United States to draw much bigger country, much more money, much more technology poured into a much smaller country for them yet. It seemed at the time that things were changing in different direction. But what he's asking is, what has started to happen in this moment in history where it seemed that, it uses the interesting expression that Marx and Freud, in the same incandescent light, set a light together, sort of burning, producing all they could produce and also being consumed and finally dispensed from thrown aside, because they brought in and they maintained this dualistic structure, which is the problem here as individual. And what is bringing up is a very, very delicate concept to understand. Then we'll read the text, but I'll introduce it first. Because what I am proposing here, this nomadic subject, for example, is not a new truth. I am not replacing an old truth with a new one. This is not the move that is taking place here. What is taking place here is that we are trying to open, or we have opened the unity, and we have to live and deal with this open unity. There is no take these out and put this one in. This is the new ruler. That would have been the same structure. What changes here is that the structure, the dualistic structure of signified and signified, or of present and a telos to reach, of phenomenological presence and logical ground and supporting, in ways these two things that together make a totality that is solid and closed. This is open, broken open, and remains broken open. Do you see the difference? He's not saying this, forget dualism, put in 3 bits or 7 bits, whatever, but that still works in the same way. No. The totalizing move that was required by a dialectical process, which was taken in by semiotics, signified and signified, put together makes the sign. That's exactly the dialectical move, especially in the French interpretation. Is not. It no longer closes, so you will end up having what are called floating signifiers, typical postmodern expression. Simulacra, things that are names without the body they are referring to. The images without the real thing. Obviously, we are also speaking from a specific moment in history. Digital has changed some of these, because you can have synthetic images that don't refer to in terms of photography, for example. But make an exercise of separation for a moment. Let's think of it more in this contextualized things. So what is insisting here, and we'll read the paragraph now, there is no new thing that replaces the old. It's just the old one remains open. And that is not only the peculiarity of this way of thinking, but it is also its strength. Because it is only on that sense that you can have something that constantly is re-territorialized and allows the nomadic move. Claiming a new truth, or claiming, as Oda would say, a new universality, bringing a new theory to replace the old theory, that would have been exactly the same kind of game. Instead, this is revolutionary because it touches the structure. It doesn't change the actors inside the same structure. Yes-ish, partially on the maybe side.
On the maybe side.
On the maybe side. Okay, then on the maybe side, who's got a very strong BBC voice? Who wants to read something?
Fred.
It's
Right.
usually that side.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the maybe side.
There's
Okay.
baby side, but that is that side. Very nice.
Try to get, like, it's the second page of the preface, page 12.
Where are we starting?
It would be a mistake.
Yeah, okay.
Read it down to the end of the paragraph where it goes.
Ars Politica.
Yeah,
Okay.
very, very slowly because this is very, very dense.
It would be a mistake to read Anti-Oedipus as the new theoretical reference. You know that much heralded theory that finally encompasses everything, that finally totalizes and reassures, the one we are told we need so badly in our age of dispersion and specialization, where hope is lacking. One must not look for a philosophy amid the extraordinary profusion of new notions and surprise concepts. Anti-Oedipus is not flashy Hegel. I think that Anti-Oedipus can be best read as an art, in the sense that it is conveyed by the term erotic art, for example, informed by the seemingly abstract notions of multiplicities, flows, arrangements, and connections, the analysis of the relationship of desire to reality and to the capitalist machine yields answers to concrete questions. Questions that are less concerned with why this or that than with how to proceed. How does one introduce desire into thought, into discourse, into action? How can and must desire deploy its forces within the political domain and grow more intense in the process of overturning the established order? Ars erotica, ars theoretica, ars politica.
What do you hear in these? David, do you want to read it again? So by guessing it. Sure.
It would be a mistake to read Anti-Oedipus as the new theoretical reference. You know, that much heralded theory that finally encompasses everything, that finally totalizes and reassures, the one we are told we need so badly.
Slowly.
In our age of dispersion and specialization, where hope is lacking, one must not look for a philosophy amid the extraordinary profusion of new concepts and surprise concepts. Anti-Oedipus is not a flashy Hegel. I think that Anti-Oedipus can be best read as an art, in the sense that is conveyed by the term erotic art. For example, informed by the seemingly abstract notions of multiplicities, flows, arrangements, and connections, the analysis of the relationship of desire to reality and to the capitalist machine yields answers to concrete questions. Questions that are less concerned with why this or that than with how to proceed. How does one introduce desire into thought, into discourse, into action? How can and must desire deploy its forces within the political domain and grow more intense in the process of overturning the established order? Ars erotica, ars theoretica, ars politica.
Does it resonate any better? Don't you find it interesting that to a political problem, Foucault opposes, or Deleuze and Guattari as well, oppose not a political method, but art. And arts, which is not as strongly strictly art as in brushes and colors in the studio, but it's something that is seemingly incommensurable with political problems. That until now have been put, especially in the Hegelian hierarchy of activities in culture, in the very low ranks of first steps humanity would take in order to understand what it means to be human. Then one becomes political subject, religious, and philosopher. That those are the three top moments. Art is absolutely at the bottom end of the process of becoming human. And here instead Foucault brings it to it's the first thing, that's the solution. But it's not a solution that yields the solution, that's the method to apply.
what possibly what Adorno says, that only through art can we understand, or maybe art is one of the ways that we can understand what we are and then convey that into action. Kind of.
I believe you're right in drawing the link to Adorno, but there are two extra elements and we were not immediately in Adorno. Firstly, is that this is not art per se, but is an ars erotica. And also, there is an art that is not meant to yield a result. It is just to inject desire into thought, into discourse, into action. To see how, the line here, how can and must desire deploy its forces within the political domain and grow more intense in the process of overturning the established order. What will come up, I believe he actually says it a bit later as well. Yes, halfway through the next page, page 13. This art of living, counter to all forms of fascism, whether already present or impending, carries with it in a certain number of essential principles. And then these principles are they're not results one aims at. If anything, the result is just to keep the system open. This is why, firstly, he says it's not a new philosophy. Would like to go on and read this paragraph.
Sure.
This art of living.
Yeah, that's fine. This art of living counters all forms of fascism, whether already present or impending, carries with it a certain number of essential principles, which I should summarise as follows, if I were to make this great book into a manual or guide to everyday life. Free political action from all unitary and totalising paranoia. Develop action, thought, and desires by proliferation, juxtaposition, and disjunction, and not by subdivision and pyramidal hierarchisation. Withdraw allegiance from the old categories of the negative, law, limit, castration, lack, lacuna, which Western thought has so long held sacred as a form of power and an access to reality. Prefer what is positive and multiple, difference over uniformity, flows over unities, mobile arrangements over systems. Believe that what is productive is not sedentary, but nomadic.
That also is very important. Read it with gravity.
I like it. Do not think that one has to be sad in order to be militant, even though the thing one is fighting is abominable. It is the connection of desire to reality, and not its retreat into the forms of representation that possesses revolutionary force. Shall I go on?
Yeah, go to the end and we'll revisit it.
Sure. Do not use thought to ground a political practice in truth, nor political action to discredit, as mere speculation, a line of thought. Use political practice as an intensifier of thought, and analysis as a multiplier of the forms and domains for the intervention of political action. Do not demand of politics that it restore the rights of the individual, as philosophy has defined them. The individual is the product of power. What is needed is to de-individualize by means of multiplication and displacement, diverse combinations. The group must not be the organic bond uniting hierarchized individuals, but a constant generator of de-individualization. Do not become enamored of power.
Do you? What's the subtitle of Anti-Oedipus?
Wait. Capitalism and schizophrenia.
What does it make? After having read these, what do you make of this subtitle, Capitalism and Schizophrenia?
Diagnosing the sickness of our society.
Schizophrenia is defined by its flux, in a sense, because it's in a constant dynamic change. Whereas capitalism is defined by a kind of linearity, having a purpose, and offering and requires a demand. where schizophrenia is a state and a condition that one, while is never frees oneself of, understands how it operates in order to cope with it.
Quite close. Any other?
Isn't schizophrenia a multiple self? So,
Yes, I guess.
No, it doesn't.
No.
But I think
No, this is why I was looking at
back me
that.
up on that one. By schizophrenia, I think the other term they use is deterritorialisation.
Yes.
I think schizophrenia, and actually I talked to John about this, and I think she agreed, it's a sort of bit of a misnomer here because
Yes.
people think in terms of the mental illness.
Mhm.
But what they're referring to, what Deleuze and Guattari are referring to, are this business of deterritorialisation, which schizophrenia is a sort of malignant deterritorialisation, if you like, but that's not what they're talking about there.
Yeah, it's a
talking
sort of
about
a harried
positive
metaphor.
effect.
That is,
Yeah.
yeah. But there is, it's precisely this point, is deterritorializing the subject that capitalism wants to keep captured in a specific role and position. And that specific role and position is precisely that of unity and lack. A unity that is to come and a lack that is here. So one is constantly, for example, working in order to make money to consume, and what one will consume will never fulfill that lack because it's not there, but one thinks that the consumerism might, or one is eluded that consumerism might give happiness. That would be the position, for example, in the same period as this of societal spectacle of the body. So there is the capitalism is a form of thought, the structure of thought and society and politics that captures the energy of desire and gives it a specific shape, one specific form of individual. And Deleuze and Guattari and with them Foucault instead push for opening these up and making deterritorializing. This is very useful too, because it is true that the image of schizophrenia is this multiplicity of inside one's head, but you're right here, it's just opposing to capitalism something that can melt and disorder that which has been imposed as a fixed order. They are trying to offer a different way to resist, and also resist here is very important as a concept, capitalism, than the direct, straightforward, linear Marxism. Because to them, Marxism was somehow playing along the same tune, applying the same structure, straightforward, traditional Marxism, and therefore not really yielding a result of any form. While if that imagine unity, the subject, or imagine unity of society, a utopia to come that Marxists would have wanted in this abstract future. If that is broken open and left open, so able to change, then something very different can take place, which is a continuous reconfiguration of the same, rather than a conclusion into an abstract happiness. So there is a continuity with Nietzsche, but it becomes far more, well, not far more articulated, it's not better, it is added of the desire and the erotic and the fact that it is an art in itself. I think that the fact that it is an art, this methodology is an art, this logic is precisely the fact that there is no, you were right David, when you say that capitalism has a derivative linearity, or the deterministic rationality is linear. Instead here, it works by association, intuition, proliferation, things that multiply horizontally. It's not an either or, I go this way or that way. There are 7 options open and they're all equally viable.
What would you use there, sorry, the 3 U's? Would you mind repeating the 3 words you said? Association.
There are quite a few here that he uses, but proliferation is one. juxtaposition, disjunction, instead of subdivision and pyramidal hierarchization.
Oh, okay, right.
So a linear logic would work by saying is either this or that. One is possible, and one is impossible. It's exactly its opposite. And it might, if it is dialectical, it will have to recuperate the exact opposite to make a totality. And then progressively it collects all the things that are the opposite into bigger and bigger totality in a hierarchical pyramid with the final telos concept at the top, and we close it and it's done. And then you're back in wherever I am in my life. I am actually in function of the points to reach. I'm not in control of any possible choice. I'm locked. While here, Foucault points out how in this notion of nomadism, the modes of moving and of choosing are very different. Are proliferation, so a multiplication on horizontal terms, where all the options available are not only valid, there are many and they are all equally valid. And you can actually, don't have to choose one over the other, you can actually take them all at the same time. And then juxtaposition, you can put things together, they don't have to be in a hierarchy, things can be co-present and both.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If artwork is not in a linear, which offers you some kind of almost illustrative or narrative image of thinking, but it can have many areas that, I mean not many areas, it can be interpreted in many ways. This is what you can think of, which are all
No,
equally
No,
okay.
totally.
How do you see?
When you paint, do you work on one canvas only at a time?
Only on one at the process of painting, but it doesn't mean that you don't change after.
But you start a painting, you work it out until the end, and then you start another one.
No, not
For
necessarily.
example.
Yeah.
You have a number of things, and you keep looking at them.
Yes.
And you work a bit on one, then that seems to go nowhere. But what you've done with your left hand, so to speak, without paying too much attention, all of a sudden is so interesting. And you work more on that, and then you make 3 variants of that one because that really grabbed your attention. But it came out almost as a byproduct of what you were doing. And then by that, you find that what you thought was your main line of investigation at the moment is not really thriving, but this is producing much more. So you're branching off, and then maybe they will rejoin later. Or maybe you find that this canvas you have abandoned, you just put a slash of some other thing through it, and
I
it
see.
becomes interesting. So you move in these parallel terms. But you can also think of it in a different point of view. If the identity of either the person or art is defined fully in a solid, clear way, leaving nothing out, then you immediately run into trouble because you can start to think in traditional terms. Art is painting, sculpture, etching, and wood carving. I don't know. And then you add to that an absolute painting or an abstraction that was yet to come, and it would have been seen as not an artistic image. Then you have to redefine that description of what is art. Then you have some of the pop that were artists that were multiplying existing images to silk screen, and well, that's a borrowed image. Art hasn't made it, so we have to readjust it. Then you have Fontana that slashes the canvas. And then you have the monochromes of Yves Klein, or the painting made with gas hobs and fire. Then you have so in order to be able to accommodate all these invention, which is the very essence of what we are doing, you need to keep the definition open. You need, for example, to say, well, I can actually think of art as, or paintings, if you want to stay with this example, as that thing that happens on canvas. Therefore, then I start listening to all the possibilities and dimensions of this canvas, and it makes sense to cut it. But I can actually think, no, what works as a very important element of it is the frame. Then you follow the work of Daniel Buren that goes around framing bits of landscape, or framing bits of cities with stripes. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He was a is a French artist, who did exactly this concept of if art is what is framed, then I can frame what exists. It is the opposite of the Duchamp move of being something that is not art inside the frame of the art institution. It goes out with the frame, and his frame was a signature of stripes, generally white and red, or white and blue, or white and or green, thick ones. And sometimes he really made big frames that were installed in the landscape, so you would see through the landscape. Sometimes it would be a more conceptual one. I remember a piece in a French city where he had bunting, and the roads in the center of town were covered with bunting, with this white and red, which was his sign. So he had somehow appropriated the space with this frame he was making, virtual frame. So this is just to give example. Now, you take one element and then you start moving sideways from that. So you can think, well, it is the surface painting deals with. Then one way of pushing that ahead is to cut through the surface and see what happens. Another one is no, it's not. It's the perimeter. The third one could have been the colors, and you go to some monochromes. Then you break down what it is, what the artist makes. Then you start pushing it, and there is a old, more recently work based on participation that challenges that art is what the artist makes, and immediately brings in the politics of who makes what, and why something is more important than another, which starts linking us with Fluxus, which they talk about. I mentioned it last week, but it comes back here.
How do you spell the name of the artist you mentioned? Who was
Daniel
the
Buren, Daniel B-U-R-I-N.
B-U-R-I-N.
Boyce, there's a Boyce, which was the list here. I said this already last week. At some point, there was a famous piece where it is him, there's a photograph of him with his famous iconic hat. I believe it's life size, and he's walking toward you, and his title, The Revolution is Us. Now, we are the revolution. It is something that involves everyone. And then with that, there's a famous claim that is either everyone is an artist or nobody is an artist. The idea that somebody is gifted, is the genius, is the romantic genius in touch with some absolute mystery, or is better at it, so just because he's got the craft. No, it turns that vertical element of artist absolute horizontal and say, well, it is creativity that makes us human, and we have all to participate of that creativity. It's a similar thing, or part of this freeing up the ars erotica as creativity, desire, politics, all together, and keeping it fluid. If we are all artists and what is an artist, we are forced to accept every art that comes from everyone else, and we can't control that. We can't control the definition. We can't control where and how and where it's going to be made and what it's going to look like. One of the pieces of Boyce I like the most is the 7,000 Oaks. I don't know if you ever come across it. It's fantastic. I interpret it as a monument to the future. This was done before he died, but it was continued after he died. The plan was to plant 7,000 oaks, which grow obviously very slowly. And next to each oak, there is a pillar and stone meter high planted in the ground. So the two are next to each other. Obviously the stone doesn't grow, but the oak will grow. And I always saw that it's fantastic. It's a monument to the future, to everything that has not yet happened, but will. So it's a monument to all the creativity, all the invention, all the new ideas that we can have. It's really turning things around. I mean, there is another piece that you can associate with that. It's not as strong, which is Piero Manzoni, pedestal of the world, which in a field is a pedestal like for a sculpture, but it's upside down. So you read it like this, so as if the world is the whole art piece, and the pedestal is all in the top. But it's more of a gimmick in this, and the piece of Boyce is really life. Right? Energy of life, which was what he worked on throughout his work. is what is making a monument to. And he's actually hoping that it's going to last for a long time because oaks take a very, very long time to grow. So there is this passage from just a second, solid points to flux. We ask also.
I say, would you liken something that's probably closer to Boyce's work than the pedestal would be his with Manzoni's ship?
Yeah, but Manzoni is closer to Dada.
Yeah.
It is very provocative in what he does. The Boyce, or maybe also because he's German, I don't know, but Boyce is more hopeful. It has an interesting form of utopia presented there, which is a challenge. It demands you to take responsibility and to participate. And in a certain way, because it is a demand, is not a utopia that will happen at some point, because it is constantly to be reinterpreted. Well, you're right, the ship is a retake of the Duchamp urinal, more provocative, harder, more brutal, but it is to me is more related to what's an art object. Boyce is
well, I mean in the notion of legacy. It's like the idea that Manzoni's dead now, but his shit lives on in cans, and it's like
but there is also you're right, but there is Manzoni was working on the make believe of art as well when he was signing models or signing people coming to the gallery the night of the opening, or the pieces where it's another can or can work where he says it contains a line of this many meters drawn by the artist. But the whole game is that you do not open the can to check because it's sealed. If you open it, the piece is no longer valid because it's signed across the seal. So it might not contain the line drawn by the artist of 3 meters or 3 kilometers or whatever. Sometimes there are very long ones which are a bit implausible. But that's precisely the point. You know, if he plays with, is closer retrospectively to some work done by the YBA where there is a lot of taking the piece, if you like, of what the artist, art, and public are supposed to do. And he was playing with that already then. So it's in between Dada and a more cynical.
Yeah.
So cynical is probably too negative, but it sits in between the make-believe and the destruction of the image of the author.
But Boyce has a sort of dark side as well, doesn't he? I mean, first impression seems great, but there's this story about how he had this interest in felt and fat because he was in the Luftwaffe and he crashed and some Tuareg people came along and saved him and wrapped him up in fat, and a bit like the English Patient.
Yes.
And all that. But it turns out he was never in the Luftwaffe, it never happened. He made it all up, or someone had made it all up. That then casts that sort of doubt over all his work, doesn't it?
Yes,
Was he
you're
just
right,
taking
I see
the
what you
piss?
mean there.
But
I mean,
it
I
can
don't
be
think he
also a
was.
part of work, and
But-
it makes fun actually. What you can invent your own story, you can invent your own past.
Well, yes, but
even-
is he inventing everything? I mean, because
Yes, but
you
would
want to
that
believe in
not-
what he thinks. But
Would that not be precisely the construction of a territory?
construction.
Of a territory, precisely what King Nestor
Yes.
does. I build a memory that was not, but that allows me, I place it now in my past, which would be a contradiction, but it allows me to go forward in a certain direction.
And we can still believe in it, even though it might have all been made up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's
And then
territory,
it
yeah.
works because
Yeah.
it creates dimensions, it creates expansions in which you can move. And if you like, what this, to me this is very, very important because one peculiar character of contemporary art at the moment, when there are no longer specific mediums and specific disciplines that have been laid out in this, by history and the masters of the past, and you know that they somehow work along those lines. The artist is required to not only do something that is meaningful and relevant, but also to come up with the technique to do that, whatever that is, whatever you decide your material is, of which the artist alone is in control of the rules. You decide the rules of the language you use. Less so if you still paint in 2016, but if you go out and say, you know what, my thing is going to be to walk into the bank, ask funny questions, and not even record it, but then relate it through some other medium or whatever, you have to make sure that that action you're making finds ways to dictate its own terms so that I can understand what's the logic of that piece of work. If I don't, I will say, it remains literally nothing. There was a while ago a piece, a show in Austria, which played along the lines of recognizing art if it looked exactly like something that could have happened by chance in the city. I didn't see it, I read an article. One of the things that was presented were 5 white cars parked in line across the street from the museum. It is simple, yes, but at the same time it was an interesting point. Is it or is not? If it is not bound by any official frame, does it remain art, or is then down to me, or up to me to decide if it is or it isn't? You see what's
Yeah, well, I just remember that a while ago there was a photo circulating around social media in the MoMA in New York. A child had dropped one of their mittens, and then people were walking around it as though it was a piece of artwork. And I suppose that's like a similar thing, except you take it out into the actual context. But this is.
There are endless even jokes about this in comedy situations where, since everything is possible in art, then even that which was not intended to be art, the person with painful feet because they walked around too much and during the day sitting in the museum is seen as a live performance and so forth, of course. But the point is that once you start doing things retroactively in these terms, so it is, maybe it depends on how you do it. You have to be, the quality of the artist then shifts on being able to dictate the terms of reception of what you're doing. If these examples are all rather one level only, it is or it isn't, that's it, and it doesn't raise any other questions, it might become more complex if you work on it. But on this point of data, I pass it on to Dave.
Right, well, I'm going to start by going back to Nietzsche and sort of following through what we said and trying to relate it back to Fluxus. What is Fluxus? Why is it so important in art, basically? Going back to Nietzsche briefly, Nietzsche's trying to figure out a way of how to escape dialectics, this certainty which we always find ourselves coming back to. And his way of going about doing this is to immerse yourself in the dirt, the messiness of existence, the sickness, in order to make that change. Because if you try to make this change via, let's say, a positive route through reason, let's say the Enlightenment position of using reason to achieve your ultimate destiny, your maximized self, let's say, really only works in a very limited sort of sense. The Enlightenment idea of what's called the Great Chain of Being, basically everything that is alive is in a link in a chain. So top link would be man, or essentially rational white man at the top, and you go down and down and down until you get to sort of plants at the bottom. And if you want to follow reason as your enlightenment method, you're not really going to break the links in the chain. You're still going to be in this hierarchical model. And so in order to break that, you need to find a way to immerse yourself in something which can't be accounted for in this chain of reason, essentially. And that's in this wading through the messiness of existence, the inhabiting of now, the present, in making art that doesn't appeal to this very dominant logic which puts people in very specific places. And in order to do that, you have to get away from Hegel
in Hegel, if you want to take a position on something, you have to construct abstract positions, which is your thesis and your antithesis, essentially. And in doing that, it creates another problem in that, obviously, when you do that, you have to mediate your position. So you can't inhabit the now, the way you are. You have to create a cut that breaks with that. You're unable to inhabit the now, you're unable to dwell where you are. You have to create an us and a them. You have to, like Foucault says in the preface, you have to separate, you have to divide and conquer. Whereas the alternative, as Foucault mentions, is just to spread, to multiply, so to make it so that you can't be caught in these positions where you have to fight on in terms which you can't win, essentially. And Nietzsche constructs this, one of his most famous conceptions is this eternal return, this coming back. But it's not a coming back in the sense of Hegel that one abstracts a position, and you go full circle, and you end up as a fully constituted subject. For Nietzsche, the return is not a return to identity, let's say, but it's a return which doesn't return to that single point, that single concept or unity of being. It's a return which creates a flow, and so it sort of spirals, but it's not sort of going anywhere. But it is going, it's moving, it's generating movement as it sort of comes back, but it's not coming back on an idea. It's coming back, or a soul, or a subject. It's always moving, and in that moving, it's generating its own territory. It's not constrained by coming back towards a ground in that sort of sense. It's a very different sort of ground, which we'll get into later in the course, I'm sure. And
Does he use the word ground in his theories?
Nietzsche, yes, I believe he's trying to get away from this idea of ground that it's developed in Hegel, it's developed in Kant. It's a very essential principle in these idealistic philosophies that there's a certainty, and that certainty allows change, but it's only a very specific sort of change. You still have to return to something which is unchangeable in a sense. And so I'll move. So does that make sense to everybody? Is that?
Would Nietzsche have used that term territory then, or was that just us?
No, that would have been. That's borrowing from Deleuze.
But that's what he meant. What he was doing.
Yeah, he was
creating a territory.
That idea when you're in a flow, you're moving, but you're not moving within a limit. You're able to move more freely. You're able to move outside of a definition which is given to you by any sort of ground. So in the Odyssey, in King Nestor's, in remembrance of Odysseus, Telemachus' father, Nestor tells Telemachus of all the great things his father did, Odysseus, in the war against Troy. In battle, how he was cunning, how he was able to defeat the enemy, not necessarily by using... Ulysses is the Romanization of Odysseus. So Odysseus is the Greek, Ulysses is the Roman name for Odysseus.
Oh, thank you.
I know it's difficult. Romans have stole bits and pieces, and they sort of inserted their own gods in place of the Greek gods as well. They sort of rewrote history, very nice. In doing so, Nestor invents this mythical figure of Odysseus as this cunning smart man that was able to outwit people of Troy, the armies. And the story itself of Odysseus depicts Odysseus as the first full human self, really, a person that can lie. Before in the Iliad, which is the first epic before the Odyssey, it's very much a war tale. People are fighting each other, people are tearing each other's guts out, and the gods are using people as sort of their weapons against each other. But in the Odyssey, Odysseus becomes this figure who can lie, who can scheme, who can outwit his enemies. He's able to outsmart the gods, essentially using his cunning. When he meets the Cyclops, who is the bastard son of Poseidon, essentially, he gives his name to the Cyclops as Nobody, as his actual name, and in doing so, Poseidon doesn't realise who Odysseus is, and he's able to infiltrate the Cyclops' home, steal his treasure. When he does, he turns around to the Cyclops and says, "Actually, it was me, Odysseus, all along." And Poseidon gets majorly pissed and swats him over to the other side of the world, where it takes him 10 years to get back home. But the idea in there that one can learn to deceive, one can find ways to gain the upper hand where you wouldn't expect to triumph over the gods. And King Nestor remembers Odysseus as this cunning fellow, and he builds on this. It becomes this legend because nobody's seen him for years. He's been trying to get back home, and the story really develops Odysseus as this fantastic figure that could sort of do anything. He wasn't grounded in as a tool of somebody else. And so that's what I'd say about the Odyssey from that. I'll move just to Fluxus, I think. Fluxus emerges at the end of beginning of the 1960s in all over the world, really. It comes between the emergence of abstract expressionism after World War II, this trying of artists to claw back some beauty in the world from after the horrors of World War II, and its decline as conceptual art starts to take hold in places like New York, and Jackson Pollock's sort of the bridge between these two. He's conceptual, but he's also abstract expressionism in his strip paintings. He's very this figure which doesn't really fit in either one of them. And Fluxus develops really from earlier artistic endeavours. I won't call them movements, but things like from Dada, which post World War One really sought to break away from the government machine, the military machine of churning people out as soldiers of war, of giving people's purpose as cogs in this war machine. They wanted to figure out, how do we get out of that? What's our room for manoeuvre in this? And a lot of the Dada artists, their artwork wasn't just creating artwork. They created interventions. They used the media, the military's tools against them. They'd post interviews with the German emperor in magazines, which they hadn't actually interviewed, but they just created hoaxes just to provoke somebody. There's one where they said, the German Emperor has endorsed Dada, so now officially Dada is dead. They like to try and push against authority without them trying to come back on them to squash them. And so a lot of what they did isn't really conserved because they didn't produce art objects per se, but they did produce collages from newspapers, cuttings, making these strange collages of politicians with robots, arms or legs, really trying to show these authorities not just as dangerous, but also mocking them as well, bringing in humour, but also not without cheapening the gravity of what they're doing.
So did it become about producing an attitude as opposed to artworks?
Yes, it was definitely about breaking the behaviour of people going into service to fight and die for ideas, for this identity, which really doesn't really constitute what they are, and for the military-industrial complex to constantly push out this argument that your identity is under threat from somebody else, from them, from this opposing side, is something that Dada artists especially tried to break down after World War One. And Fluxus very much takes what the Dada artists did and it brings it into the era of the 1960s, which post World War II is beginning to break down boundaries between what role different people in society take. It had Vietnam War was going on, role of women, of non-white people. These things were always all started to go up in the air, and the artists that associated themselves with Fluxus saw this arena as an opportunity to intervene, and the manifesto of Fluxus was developed by, what's his name, George Maciunas, who was very much the big artist, theoretician of Fluxus. And I'll go through the small points of the manifesto. It's very short. First one says Fluxus is...
on the program.
Fits on the program. Very useful. Fluxus is an attitude. It is not a movement or a style. They are for art histories. So, with art movements like abstract expressionism or conceptual art, let's say, they are then identifiers in which you place artworks. You say this artwork is associated with that movement. That's what it means. It's exploring the capacities of artwork in this forum. And Fluxus, as an attitude, it doesn't want to be constrained to talking about the limits of painting or the limits of representation in sculpture, say. It wants to intervene in society, in now. It wants to make things happen. And to wake people up, in a sense. It's meant, like Dada again, it's meant to provoke with its attitude. Second point, Fluxus is intermedia. So it's, again, not constrained to painting or sculpture or video. It goes across platforms. It's meant to multiply, spread, like Foucault says. So you can't pin it down again in an art history sense. If you try to research Fluxus, you do run into a problem that there's no real artifacts. There's no photographs of these events that happen. There's only very few odd photographs of people tipping buckets of water on their head, or people tied up in the street, which, looking at it now, has no context. It seems odd, but it does provide an insight into what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to produce this artifact of meaning which would be canonised in art history. It wouldn't have its meaning in art history. It would have its meaning in its flow, in the time when it was made, when it happened. One of the big people associated with Fluxus was Alan Caprow, and his idea of happenings, things that would happen in the streets, in what he'd call free theatre, in the street. It would be a performance, but everyone could see it. It wasn't behind closed doors. It was intervening on people's way to work. They actually happened. It wasn't a happening elsewhere. It's happening now in events. These are events which aren't isolated or preserved for future study, let's say. They're happening now, and they have an impact now. Point 3. Fluxus creators like to see what happens when different media intersect. They use found and everyday objects, sounds, images, and texts to create new combinations of objects, sounds, images, and texts. So, piecing together collages, cutouts. If they do a performance in the street, what's part of the artwork, what's not? Is the sound of cars going by part of it? Are hecklers part of the artwork or not? All these different things are trying to refuse a categorisation in order, so they're not reduced to this identity to say, oh, this is associated with this art movement called Fluxus, it's meaning to do this. Instead, Fluxus it's part of life. It's not separate from what is happening now. It has real political ramifications. It has resonance with people. It can shock people. It can offend people. It can bring people into make people realise new ways of looking at things, of understanding things. Point 4, Fluxus works are simple, the art is small, the texts are short, and the performances are brief. It's self-explanatory. It's meant to be snappy. It's not meant to have a lingering artifact or object which can be brought back into an art history or a movement. It can be associated with. It's meant to be there and gone, and its impact sort of ripples out across people, across where it is, and really not as an isolated incident. And the final point, Fluxus is fun. Humour has always been an important element in Fluxus. So, again, like Foucault says, although you're fighting these horrid beasts, you've got to have a certain lightness about you, about what your artwork is doing, so that it doesn't become so entrenched that it stops moving, it stops resonating and having an impact. And instead of identity, these artworks have a notoriety about them. They might be reported on. This shocking event happened, and that's how it gets its impact, by using the medium of mass media, of reports, of word of mouth, sort of against government assemblages, which feed people specific information the government wants people to hear. Fluxus uses that machine against them. You didn't invent the machine, but it can use it for its own uses. You might not invent your materials, but you can use them in your own way. You create this field of equipment, of machine, of bits and pieces, of objects, of sounds, images, and you make them resonate, ripple. And Foucault, one of the main points Foucault emphasises in a lot of his work is that identity, again, it's not a fixed concept, but it's the self is something that you invent, you make yourself. And with Fluxus, that is developed in this idea of notoriety. You might not have your name attached to something, but you might become notorious. You're wanted, in a sense that people don't want you to be in certain places to do certain things, but you're still able to move about, to make these impacts and get known for it, but without people sort of coming down on you. Because this idea of notoriety, or this invention itself, is that you can, like Odysseus, you can be a bit tricky, you can deceive people in a sense, you can move about in a much more fluid manner than simply projecting an idea which is very closed or stable, something which can very easily be shot down or rejected from an art gallery. If you're fluid in that sense of, you can use whatever you find to hand, you can have objects off the street, you can use the street, or you can lie in front of a road, pour a bucket of water on your head, you can use whatever sort of comes to hand in order to make a political action, to make artwork which always has this movement in it. It creates its own territory of happenings. And I think, really, Fluxus doesn't have much resonance today. It has resonance in the sense that it has become this art, historical, this movement which we can pinpoint in certain time, at a certain time, in a certain place, but there is still that element in it which eludes classification. It doesn't have objects which are being brought and sold in art markets. It still retains a sense of, did that really happen? Who were these people? What were they doing? And that's that sort of questioning we still have about Fluxus. Still, I think, maintains its mobility and its in the way it really shows just how the works of art aren't chained down to what they resonate with, this movement in philosophy of countering fascism, of moving down disjointed paths which other people can't pick up on. They can denounce as degenerate, but that won't stop it anyway. It doesn't have to stop it, it can still proliferate.
Temporary territories.
It sounds like a movement on the move all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's precisely
It's not the
point.
false movement that Hegel says. You're not coming back around. That's like, come back around to where you were, but you're now whole. It's like you're moving, but you're not completing anything. You're moving for the sake of moving, because you want to change, because you can change.
You can.
You can change.
Is that to say that Fluxus didn't really end anyway, in the sense that they weren't?
Never had a beginning either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
so
so
Fluxus never really existed. I mean, they could claim at the same time.
So it's like I mean I'm just like reading their manifesto. It has such kind of such a closeness to our kind of contemporary way of understanding art and how it functions, as to whether that, like, there are certain parts of it, as you were saying, that kind of open theatre led to, like, a hecklers in the street or whoever's coming is also part of the artwork. I mean, as to what some people know that as being part of relational aesthetics today, but that again is another way of trying to kind of categorise. That
Relational
Fluxus
aesthetics is very much a, well, I think it's a very sterilisation of, these sort of happenings, really.
Yeah.
But you see, what you bring up, I think, is quite interesting, because the whole point of the creation of a territory, instead of the moving of the geography of the ground, is that as much as it has come to be, it will disaggregate by intention or by time. So territories are temporary, and the description that Dane was making of these events, barely recognizable as something with intention, are precisely that. They last for a brief time, they're ephemeral. Sometimes they're always on the cusp of being recognized as something. Alan Kaproff, if you're curious, there is a fantastic book written by him which is titled Blurring the Boundary Between Art and Life, which is a series of essays. And in one of them he speaks of, it works around the notion of performing, which in English has a double meaning of performing on stage, with quotation, or performing a task. So he performs for himself every morning shaving in front of the mirror, and he does both things because he's performing the shaving act, but because he can see himself, he's also performing theatrically, and what he sees that. A friend of his goes on to run for mayor for a small town upstate New York, becomes the mayor, and runs the city for 20 years as an art performance, but nobody knows that, he's the mayor. So there is this fantastic double thing that is taking place of blurring the boundary. Vice versa, there is a Greek artist, part of Fluxus, I can't remember his name, which seems much more inside.
Cornelis.
Cornelis, yes. Which one of his pieces is fantastic. Is a painting, it's a big green canvas, it's a bit like that one, with a pentagram with some music written on it. And as such is the object of the art gallery. But actually, the piece is a performance that the music to be played by a live musician that sits next to it and plays it every so often. So, and they find situations in which they intervene. The existence of the painting in the art gallery is a perfect material. It's the existence of the painting, not the making of the painting. It's a perfect material to exploit and push it further and make it last for a certain period and then go back. But then was very, very important what I believe you said about the reaction to the war. You come out of the war and you again say, well, what is going to happen? Like Dada, we are going to, no, but we find ourselves as being put back to be cogs in the military-industrial machine. First we were in the Fordist chain, then we were in the trenches, now we're back in the Fordist chain, and now we're back in the war, and then again to produce and consume, produce and consume, produce and consume. These nonsensical interventions are somehow stopping the economy from flowing across from intention to product. And you're right, it has ramified in contemporary art quite a bit, but at the same time, it has the risk of that all territories have to become rigid, stiff, too codified, and then recognizable. You give it a name, and it becomes art history.
Yeah.
It's not a style, or what is it? The first one. A movement. As soon as you can define it, it's there.
Yeah.
So the Nietzschean echo is here as well. You're very, very right in starting from it. It's very fun to play with the Fluxus memory if you can find things. You might have seen some famous pieces of Nanjum Pike where he was playing the TV and the magnet. The TV is on, and with the magnet alters the magnetic field of the screen, and there are these fantastic curves that happen to the screen. Or things where he plays, or going back to the Ars Erotica, bringing the sexual and the desire, the cello player that plays naked. Fluxus woman, it had still to be a woman back there, obviously, but that plays the cello naked, and that created great scandal because of the nudity, obviously. Less than Duchamp playing chess with a naked woman for some reason. Duchamp is fully
It's the way you
clothed.
see the problem.
No, but they historically, the piece of Duchamp playing chess with a naked woman, probably because it was a photograph, and this was a performance,
Yes.
raised less issues than the nudist cello player.
But But you know, cello performance for women is a very sexual thing, really.
Probably that's why I was
You
also
can't
chosen.
always
Yes.
problem.
So all these interventions that what's the meaning of a naked cello player? Can you point? No, you can't. But you can unravel it endlessly, and at the same time, you remain with nothing in your hands. So that's the attitude that we are now encountering, and in part still is this. A lot of contemporary artists have closed it down in the two direction of either market or visual sociology, which is the curse of contemporary art. I see that as a good heritage to still revisit.
It's a good question. Why it's not now?
What is that?
You see,
Why we bought
You
the Tory?
read it's very contemporary. Very contemporary.
I want to play the cello.
Why it's a movement of past? Because it has so much to offer. It has revolutionary ideas.
Yes,
These movements tend to get institutionalised, don't they? And sort
Very
of
quickly,
adopted
yes.
by the main art movement. And
But that's when you have an
So
object.
it's no
that
longer a-
object has to go in somebody's bedroom or in a museum. That's very easy to.
it's
Because
no longer
we
a
are able
protest,
to,
is it?
to reify also immaterial things. I mean, look at Facebook. You're consuming your own life while you live it, constantly posting it. On Instagram or
I'm on
LinkedIn.
Slack
Slack. And
with Facebook.
we are consuming our own emotions, our own experience, by the very fact that we have to put it through this thing. So it is a moment that is very technically or potentially very powerful, but at the same time is the machine of capture that Foucault described is very successful in capturing our desire even before it starts expressing itself. And it's not only the induced desire of consumerism, it's really running ahead of it is more and more difficult.
But I actually see them more like a political movement because they challenged everything.
Yes,
It
but
was,
you
really, rather than doing
But we have-
expressing their own
But we have a
desire.
culture of political apathy. We have a culture of political apathy. So the fact that I mean there are many
Political
reasons.
apathy.
Apathy. People don't care.
Really?
Well,
Who doesn't?
I don't care.
Oh.
Well, I don't know if you care.
Yes, come
No,
and see
I'm
me
not.
outside.
It's not only the apathy, it's that the system, especially in art, is extremely good at absorbing any provocation and turning it around and making it harmless at
Yeah.
a speed that has increased exponentially. So now it's very difficult to do something that is as provocative.
Yeah.
It is almost more
Back in Joe.
provocative not to be
Well, that's,
provocative and paint a landscape.
who was it who called it a dominator culture? Someone said this. Dominator. Don't worry, it'll come to me one day.
I just think it's a bit like a joke, isn't it? Because these things, they sort of wear off after a while. because
Extremely
once
Does
you
it
said
mean every
it,
moment has a lifespan? Like a postcard, 2 years or 4 years?
But
whatever.
Capro did call his happenings events that could be long or they could be short, but they happened and they could be of varying length depending on their impact, how many people it sort of resonated with, how many people it offended, or how long it took for someone to denounce it. That sort of sense. So it's not that it has a strict lifespan, but yeah, there's a constant game of people trying to close it down and you try and find another opening
Does it
for it.
have a life beyond its own event in the sense that as soon as it's kind of like when it's taken on board by people, you were saying if people continue that, then its life is moved.
Yeah, it doesn't have to maintain the form in which it originally happened, but it's ripples, it's waves, it's
But that's
Pity
precisely
they
those
didn't have
non-cultures.
internet.
So, no, I mean, without going into platitudes of contemporary culture and media, but it is true that with the way we consume and the way communication functions, it's faster and faster. So the lifespan of something has become shorter. Not just technically, it's not inbuilt obsolescence, so that you buy a computer and it is programmed to die in 3 years' time. And if you find the right spot in the program, it will last 20 more. But if you want to see it online, Planned Obsolescence, a fantastic documentary on YouTube. Planned Obsolescence. About planned obsolescence.
Land of
Obsolescence. Am I pronouncing it?
Obsolescence.
Obsolescence, sorry.
obsolete.
But I was speaking earlier today with Henry, and he said something funny about it. They say the queer theory is dead, and actually
Oh,
now.
he said that.
No, he said there is this idea
It
that
must be true.
queer theory is dead,
He has no joke.
and people are just saying now I'm going wild, and it's as in there is the need for rebranding, continuous remarketing of the same product, because otherwise it becomes stale too quickly and it's no longer interesting. The problem is the same. Maybe the artists will be the same, or the scholars, whatever, people are the same, but you need to name it anew. We are witnessing these. There is no question that things are super fast. And a while ago, you could buy the same pair of shoes over 20 years. Well, one pair out, go back to the shop, there is the same model. Now every season there is a new model. You go, man, I might do it last year.
But that's consumerism to make you buy.
Yes,
But you still have your old pair of shoes.
yeah, but when they're worn, they're worn. But in general, the lifespan of things and concepts and moments of attitudes
Shortened.
is shortened.
Instant and
So
immediate.
in this sense, you're absolutely right. The Fluxus still retains a very strong potential, but at the same time, it has been made into a thing of the past, not by some mean character hiding in a secret office. It is just the way things move. So the problem is, which attitude could you, for example, take now to put spanners in the works, if it is possible at all to put spanners in the works at the moment?
That will be the question for Esther.
Question is, I say question, yes.
In what sense, Thomas, in
No, not in the artwork, in the work.
in the world?
In the works.
In the world.
It's an expression as to say, how can you interrupt, how can you jam the system in order to
How we-
resist,
How you can interrupt this fast-moving.
for example.
But isn't
Do you
This-
need to
this-
go to
This is why I said earlier that resisting is another key word that comes into this. If one vector is captured, so the individual is invented, is always constructed by the culture and society lives in, but one therefore knows that the identity is not natural, so can try to reinvent it. And how do you resist that capture so that you can have some room to invent yourself, at least partially, as you like?
But we still invent in the movement when everything goes on.
Yes, but the first step is to understand that everything is moving, because we are actually told otherwise.
Really.
Well, that's actually is not. It's individual. It's you consume, you do this. That's what you're supposed to do.
You have to move as well that fast.
You have to move as fast, or even faster, or a different speed, or a different. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
you have to be off sync. But how to open up that off sync space is just not a decision, because you might be crushed by the system. Foucault comes in with the notion of this ars erotica. If you can manage to free that, then there is a new methodology, and that's another key word here. because-
Opening up.
Yes. Did it make sense? Altogether? Are you all becoming adept of Fluxus?
I think we are already.
You're already quite
I
fluent,
think so.
yes.
There was a slogan I liked it very much when we had this party, federal party at the head of the school, and it was in one of his photographs, projected photographs, and it said something like this: to stay the same, I have to change. Is it related?
it's an odd idiom, isn't it? The only thing that stays the same is change.
Which is ultimately the bottom line thesis of Nietzsche is that
Or I have to stay, I have to change to stay the same.
that also comes from Leopard, an Italian novel about the conquer of Sicily by the kingdom in 1861. For everything to remain the same, for the aristocracy to remain aristocracy in Sicily, everything must change. We have to change king. But what comes from Nietzsche is that ultimately this what returns constantly is not something, it is change. So you continuously encounter difference coming back. And you change, and you change, and you change, and you change. If you stop that return, you're dead. If you stop territories from coming together, but also being morphing and disgregating and new aggregation come together, is death. In chemistry, it's called dissipative structure. You need to consume. We need to consume to be alive. We need to
Dissipated.
Yeah. And so does art. I mean, in a certain way, you could not keep Fluxus being Fluxus forever. It was 45, 50 years ago. Now, that changes too. Another attitude to resist being homogenized, homologated completely might function better. And it's down to the artist to invent which one. That's key. It's not written in the book.
You have to remember, like King Nestor remembers, in order to keep moving.
But he invented it, did he?
Wow.
So you can also invent a lot of things. That's where Boyce was a king. He was in good company.
He was a Fluxus member.
He was
member.
Yes.
He was Fluxus.
Oh yeah, he was.
Was that
Did Fluxus events?
atmosphere,
Yes.
But he also invented his past patent.
But where does the invention end?
Legend,
Where does it
yeah.
begin?
But it's again, when you get caught, then you're in trouble. People stop relating to you.
If your identity, if Boyce is just identified as a liar, then who wants to sort of take him seriously? Who wants to? What purpose does his artwork have if he's just a liar? He's just a fabricator.
Well, you can say the truth is his medium.
Yeah.
He's working with the concept of falseness or truth. And so it's art, so it's no longer lying.
But he fabricated, in his artwork, he fabricated more or less things. He would bring together and change. You can say it's
But the artwork is
fabricated.
still real.
But
Yes,
it was
it
also,
is.
it had also what one sees. I mean, sometimes Tate had a room, Tate Modern in London a while ago, an old room with Boyce work. And it's a bit strange because what one sees now, Boyce work, is just the props of the performances. Or
The
the-
work disappeared.
No, there are the objects, all the props, the things that he used during the performances are what one sees now. But if one wants to see Boyce's work, one should at least see a video of the performance.
Oh, yeah.
But then, at the same time, he was aware of it and he played with it, and he had two distinctive objects: his hat and his walking stick, which were part of his character, his persona, his figura, his artistic appearance. And very often he left the hat and the stick where he had the performance with all the other objects as somehow a signature or a sign that something had taken place. So what was there was not the piece. The piece was not these things to be seen. Now, Tate they had an old Volkswagen van with a chain of objects attached to it, which he drove to, I don't remember where.
The wolf pack.
The wolf pack, something like that. It was sleds. Was it not? Yeah.
Yes, sleds.
And the whole thing must have been, the van was driving somewhere. The sleds were dragged by the van on the road or on the snow, whatever. Seeing the thing parked in a room on the second floor of Tate Modern, it's just an odd presence of something that's usually outside indoors.
One of my favourite pieces is when he did this lecture and he had like 4 blackboards where he wrote on the blackboards with chalk, and at the end of the lecture
Oh yes,
someone comes up and says, "I want to buy these blackboards, these are amazing." So what Boyce does, he gets an eraser, rubs off all the chalk and sells him the eraser.
But I think he was more than Fluxus, wasn't he? He was a sculptor as well, and an artist, and all these things.
It was,
So
was
there's a lot
playing with
of sort of-
materials too.
Yeah.
There was some of that as well. But the whole point was that these materials were conveyors of energy, and they were used in the fat and the felt were what saved his life in the meat he had built for himself.
Yes.
The fat was energy and the fat was the protection. But the whole thing revolved around making as they dreaded, not making to have the final product there. So that's why I insist on the performance count and more. And then not bringing life in. There were performances where it was swiping the road and collecting all the dust and the junk and the garbage and then exposing that. Or there was another, the famous free university experiment, which lasted a few years, which was a completely alternative fluid form of education, which involved a lot of fist fights at some point, because the argument broke out into. There's a famous photo where these holding, I don't know if he had it where it came from, but there was, you don't have it in Britain, but in Europe often in classrooms there is a crucifix. And the seminar became an argument, and the argument became a fist fight, and somebody hit him, and there is a photograph of him with blood streaming down his nose, holding the crucifix like this, trying to calm the people down. And it's brilliant. I mean, yes, it is brilliant. I mean, that's,
People can fight over it. It's
Yeah,
brilliant.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
great. This is what it should be like.
Some of his sculptures are very good, aren't they? There was an exhibition of this stuff down in Hastings several years ago, and there's a sort of bucket and a ladder
oh yes.
and a
yes.
sort of washing line or something, and it's really wonderful. I don't know how you can, I can't sort of describe it really, but there was something about the
There is
way-
a lot of promise
I mean,
of things to
it was
happen.
okay as it
yeah,
was
yeah.
without the performance.
There's a lot of alchemy in it
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well, isn't there? And I know that's I can remember seeing one of the sculptures where there is a ladder and suspended animation between two weights.
Oh yes, that's
And
yes,
these
yes.
are all kind of like directly pulled out of ideas of alchemy, and I suppose is that turning shit into gold. And it's
and
quite
that's
a
the
beautiful ideas you're saying about his felt and his fat became the things that saved him.
Yes.
But if his own kind of house was a constructed thing, then they did that figuratively in the past and also in their value in his art practice, which is equally like which kind of destroys the whole charlatan. If he's a complete liar.
I know it was presented as a shaman and a charlatan as well.
But it was all very tongue-in-cheek though, surely. I mean, when
I believe it
it
was
was a lie, it was just a sort of
tongue in cheek
mystery.
than saying this is as far creativity can go. This is as far as the artist can spread creativity, even building the image of the artist, its persona, and turning the lamp of fat and the felt into a life-saving amulet, and then that be turned into a money-making, reified object.
But he didn't mean to make money with it. I don't think.
No, I don't think that was the
way.
intention, but
It's
at the same
it's
time it's part of the
already-
same alchemic process. Fred was quite right in bringing it up.
We need to look at boys.
We need to look at boys, Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Attention.
We are riding together or oh you're not yes. I think I'm gonna you are tired already. You can leave your bike in the studio, I guess. Yes. Sorry. Fine. There is nothing help us things if you sit down. You have respect. Another time in the tram, yes. And I don't want to drink only. Nothing.
There's only since the time. Where do you stay?
I stay with Frank.
Okay.
Train back.
Goodbye, thank you. 15 minutes on the train, 5 minutes walking.
I live out that way,
All right.
Snellchurch, which is a couple of stops along
Okay.
the line.
You get the train?
Yeah.
tomorrow.
You've got
Yes.
I won't be here, but yes.
Yes, I will lead. I will gather the troops.
Yeah, so it's good for next.
Gathering.
Yeah, it's good. She's didn't want
You know
any
that,
money or
that
anything.
comment we made last week
Thank
about
you.
psychoanalysis being for those that are well. It was very helpful to
Thanks.
understand the degrees of truth and non-truth attached to these things.
I don't understand Freud as a philosopher. Really. I've been sort of brought up with him as a sort of the founder of psychoanalysis, and
He just
that
gave an
sort of-
image of the subject.
It's different, you know. But,